Hey everybody, Trey here. Welcome back to another video. We have a very potent severe weather event, a potential severe weather outbreak on tap for today across parts of the Midwest into the Mid-South. The SPC has upgraded to a level 4 out of 5 moderate risk there in the red shaded region. So much of Iowa, northern Missouri, western and northwest Illinois into southwest Wisconsin under the gun for the greatest severe weather threat for today, which includes the potential for a severe weather outbreak. Large enhanced risk surrounds that, level 3 out of 5 up into central Wisconsin, western Michigan down into Illinois, and much of Missouri into far eastern Kansas. And then a broad slight risk area extends all the way up from the upper peninsula of Michigan downward into southwest Texas. So a very broad, significant severe weather threat for today that is going to be focused in the Midwest there across Iowa, parts of Illinois, Wisconsin, and Missouri. All hazards on the table for today, and all hazards are expected to be significant. Strong, long-track tornadoes are a possibility here, particularly within the 15% hashed region there, the red stippled region there, the greatest threat for some strong EF2 plus tornadoes in the red shaded region there. So places like Des Moines over to eastern Iowa, Waterloo, Cedar Rapids, up to La Crosse, Wisconsin, in the 15% hashed risk area there for some potential for significant long-track tornadoes. 10% hashed area extends up into central Wisconsin, down into the northern portions of Missouri, just north of the Kansas City area there. Large 2 and 5% risk areas extend down into Missouri, northeast Oklahoma, northwest Arkansas, and a 2% down to the Red River. So tornado potential is certainly greatest here across the Midwest, but we could see a few tornadoes down as we go into parts of the southern plains. Significant damaging wind is going to be a very high threat today. 45% hashed area for significant damaging winds. We could see winds in excess of 60, 70, 80, 90 miles an hour today across these areas, particularly in the pink stippled region there. So significant straight line damaging winds are expected today, as is significant large hail. 45% hashed risk area for significant hail there in parts of southwest to central Iowa down into northwest Missouri, with a broad 30 and 15% hashed areas extending all the way down into Kansas, Missouri, down all the way along the dryline into southwest Texas. But the greatest hail threat going to be up there in the area of southwest Iowa to central Iowa down into northwest Missouri. So all severe hazards on the table for today. A very potent severe weather outbreak is on tap. Very robust severe convection is expected over a widespread area with all severe hazards on the table. Apologies for the road noise you hear in the background. I'm coming to you from Bethany, Missouri this morning en route to Iowa here just shortly. Doing this a little bit earlier than normal because we need to get on the road here shortly. So we don't have all of our normal data that we have in, particularly regarding the model data, but we still have plenty of observed data in here to take a look at, and then we'll take a look at some model data here toward the end of the video. So very potent severe weather threat on the table for today. Let's go ahead and dive in. Let's take a look at what's going on right now. We have a pretty big complex of storms moving across southwest Iowa and far northwest Missouri, quickly moving off to the east-northeast. This has had several severe thunderstorm warnings and a few tornado warnings with it. This is expected to move off to the east pretty quickly, and we don't see much convection behind it, so that should allow for pretty quick destabilization behind this morning line, especially with a very progressive pattern moving in, progressive upper air pattern moving in. That should clear things out pretty quickly behind this morning line. We do have a severe thunderstorm watch in effect for this line as it moves across southern Iowa. Here are the counties you see here shaded in blue. They are under a severe thunderstorm warning for perhaps some significant damaging winds, as well as maybe a tornado or two as this line continues off to the east this morning. Let's go to our upper air maps now. This is the 500 millibar map on the SPC mesoanalysis page, and we have had a very nice little shortwave develop within this broader trough centered across the western half of the country. You can see the shortwave very clearly in the height contours here, a little downward kink in the contours there over eastern Colorado and western Kansas, associated with a pretty strong jet streak, 70 to 80 knots of flow there, associated with that little shortwave. This shortwave will continue to rapidly progress off to the northeast today, moving into eastern Nebraska, western Iowa by about lunchtime or to early afternoon. So this is going to be a pretty progressive little shortwave here, and therefore we will see pretty early initiation with this main batch of storms coming later on in the next few hours. If we go down to the surface, we have had a significant surface response because we've had a very significant mid and upper level response with this negatively tilted shortwave. Down here at the surface, we have had a surface low develop across Kansas into Nebraska. Fairly broad surface low at this point, but it is tightening up as we speak, and it will continue continue to deepen as we go into the afternoon. 998 millibars here at its core right now. That is expected to deepen pretty significantly going into the afternoon, and again should be somewhere in the eastern or western Iowa vicinity by about midday or so, and will continue to move off to the northeast. And the northern, wherever this surface low is, and the associated warm front with this surface low looks to be right in this vicinity here. We'll zoom in on our raw surface data in a second, but this warm front will lift north, and as it does so, that will allow for the northern extent, allow us to see where the northern extent of the severe threat is today. And that is expected to creep into southern Minnesota to southern and central Wisconsin. At 850 millibars as well, we've had a pretty significant response here. This is the low-level cyclone, about a kilometer off the surface. Very strong low-level jet associated with this low-level cyclone here. For all the way from Nebraska, Iowa, southward into Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, 30 to 40, 50, 55 knots or so of flow there, just off to the east of the center of that low-level cyclone, and that is expected also to continue to intensify as we go into the afternoon. As this negatively tilted shortwave aloft translates off to the northeast, this low-level cyclone will as well, and it will strengthen given that very strong mid and upper level response. So we should see low-level winds here today in the 50 to 60 to 70 plus knot range, allowing for very strong moisture advection into this region, as well as very strong low-level shear with these winds out of the south-southwest at 60, 70 plus knots. So very intense low-level jet here with this system. Kinematically, this is a very intense setup, and that's why the SPC has gone with the upgrade to moderate risk for both significant damaging winds and perhaps strong tornadoes. So let's take a look now at the raw surface data. I'll refresh this here real quick so we can see where our pertinent features are at the moment. Again, a fairly broad surface low at this point. Don't really see a very tight center, but it does kind of extend up into Nebraska from Kansas. You can see the broad cyclonic flow here across this region. Northerly flow on the west side of the screen there, more southerly flow there just out to the east. So we do have a broad cyclonic circulation there today, and that is again expected to tighten up a little bit as we go into the afternoon as the low moves off to the northeast. Here's our warm front. Right here, it looks to be right in the kind of on the the Iowa-Missouri border there, moving off to the northeast pretty quickly. A little bit of a wonky drawing there, but you get the idea where this warm front is. Southerly flow to the south, more easterly flow to the north. And again, this initial complex here across southwest Iowa going to move off to the east. And once we get clearing behind that, we should have a pretty quick transition of this warm front to the north, along with the lifting surface low up into northern Iowa, southern Minnesota. So that, again, the warm front will be the northern extent of the warm sector, and it may very well be convectively reinforced with some outflow from this ongoing complex. So we may see this warm front stay a little bit farther south, at least initially, but it will start to lift northward pretty quickly going into the late morning to early afternoon hours today. Very rich moisture to the south of the warm front, mid to upper 60s dew points here, upper 60s dew points across far southern Kansas and we move into the 70s dew points there across southern Kansas into Oklahoma. Given such strong low-level flow, we should see those stronger dew points, those higher dew points, really rapidly advect into this region. We already have mid to upper 60s here across Iowa, but those should increase a little bit as we go into the day today and see that very strong low-level jet pulling that moisture northward, that best moisture northward for a very broad, robust, rich moisture warm sector here moving northward across the risk areas for today. Taking a look at some soundings from this morning, we are doing this a little bit earlier, so not all the soundings are in, but we do have our Topeka, Kansas sounding here. And you can see it's a fairly loaded gun type profile, very much strong instability at this point. For this point in the morning, 1,700 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE, rooted above a pretty strong capping inversion here between about 700 and 850 millibars. So capped atmosphere, but plenty of elevated instability helping this complex off to the north continue. Again, this is the storms here in this complex will remain fairly elevated. We could see some brief spin-ups along the line, but the greatest threat with this initial complex here moving across southwest Iowa this morning is going to be damaging wind. But very strong instability already at this point, only expected to increase as we go into the afternoon. And as that trough moves in rapidly, with some clearing behind this morning round, that cap should really rapidly erode. Moist layer does extend up to about 850 millibars, so not super deep, but not a detriment to this setup at all. And you can see the kinematics that are moving in pretty quickly with this setup. Very strong low-level shear here, rapid increase in the intensity of the winds and veering of those winds as you go up in the lowest kilometer or two of the atmosphere. 0 to 1 kilometer storm relative helicity, about over 400 meters squared per second squared. So very strong low-level shear, very strong low-level warm moist advection, as evidenced by that curvature in the hodograph, those veering winds with height. And we should have stronger flow aloft moving into the region just off to the northeast as that trough translates through. Therefore, very strong deep layer shear for organized convection and strong low-level shear for both momentum transport downward to the surface through downdraft, so strong straight line winds at the surface, as well as that strong tornado threat given very intense low-level shear. So pretty much a classic loaded gun type profile for a significant severe weather event with strong instability, strong deep layer, and low-level shear. All signs are pointing to a pretty significant event today. But there are some caveats as far as how quote-unquote chaseable this will be for folks out there chasing today, and the overall storm mode is going to be perhaps an issue with this setup and may hold it back from being an even greater severe weather threat today. So let's take a look at some model data real quick. This is going to be the 6Z NAM. The 12Z NAM is not quite in yet, but this is at 500 millibars. There's our little shortwave that has emerged from the flow here across New Mexico back toward midnight last night. That has continued to move off very quickly off to the northeast. And by midday, here is where our trough is going to be located. You can see the kinks in the height contours there. The axis of the trough situated somewhere right in there from South Dakota into eastern Nebraska, eastern Kansas. And out ahead of that, we're going to be right in the exit region of the trough there across the western half of Iowa, at least initially. So very strong kinematics here. Your classic kind of exit region severe weather event here for folks in Iowa. Farther down to the south, we get a little bit less forcing down here across Kansas, eastern Kansas, western Missouri into northeast Oklahoma, a little bit behind that trough axis, so a little bit less forcing, which may lead to a slightly more discrete storm mode down there to the south. But again, I think with the progressive nature of this setup, I do think we will see a pretty quick transition to a more messy linear mode. Even down there where forcing is a little bit less than it is right ahead of the upper trough there into Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin. So that continues off to the northeast pretty quickly going into the afternoon hours, and by 0Z 7 p.m. that axis of the trough going to be well off to the east, right in this vicinity there. And out ahead of that will be the continuation of the severe threat there across eastern Iowa, southeast Minnesota, and much of Wisconsin and northwest Illinois. Down at the surface, let's see how that surface low responds through the day. And I'll try to zoom in here to our central plains sector so you can see it. So we'll zoom in here to 12Z. Elongated surface low at this point, once again, not a very tight surface low, but still a very strong and intensifying surface low at this point in the morning. We continue off into the afternoon. The NAM has that surface low all the way up to basically southwest Minnesota by 18Z. So very rapid transition of the surface low and deepening of the surface low. You can see about 992 millibars there at the core of that surface low. So a very rapidly northeastward translating surface low here, and to the east and south and southeast of that, that's going to be where our favorite area for severe storm initiation will be in this environment. Once again, with this progressive nature and the timing of this trough and surface low, we are expecting to see very early initiation of storms here right out ahead of the surface low, perhaps by late morning even, out across far eastern Nebraska into western Iowa. Just looking at this, I tend to think this might be a little bit too progressive. We are going to see a pretty quick transition northeastward with these features. If we were to look where our low is right now at this point, it's still back here across really the main center of the low, back here across northern Kansas. So it is expected to move pretty quickly, but I still think by probably lunchtime, early afternoon, that surface low is probably going to be down here into northwest to west central Iowa. So I think the NAM might be overshooting the position of the surface low, maybe just a little bit, but still nonetheless we should have a broad warm sector out ahead of the surface low by late morning to early afternoon for that robust severe threat to get underway. Down here at our moisture, so let's see our dew points here, those 70s dew points down in Kansas and Oklahoma, going to continue to make their way northward very quickly going into the early afternoon hours. I'll put it on the Midwest sector here. So there are our pertinent boundaries. So our surface low, once again, out here across southeast Minnesota, as progged by the NAM. Again, that could change a little bit going into as we go into the next several hours. We'll have to watch the positioning of these features. But the NAM has it up there, southeast Minnesota, the South Dakota border region, and our dry line / Pacific front or cold front, whatever you want to call it, draped down here to the southwest. Warm front here all the way up to the north, at least the synoptic warm front is all the way up here to the north. The impacts of morning convection, we'll have to see how those play out. If we look at our temperature map, it does look like we have recovery up here all the way into southern Minnesota. So that should be where our warm front is going to be setting up by early afternoon. So again, a broad warm sector here, at least from west to east extent. Lots of real estate for these storms to work with, and therefore we'll have a long duration severe threat today. But ample moisture up here, mid to upper 60s to even some low 70s dew points showing up across Iowa into southwest Wisconsin, down into Missouri and Kansas. So a broad, very moisture-rich warm sector here out across this region already by late morning to early afternoon. So storms should get going here with the trough, the upper trough moving in, the forcing moving in, and it's going to be a lot of forcing. Very progressive shortwave, very strong winds associated with that shortwave. So we should see a very progressive, very early initiation and probably a lot of storms in this environment. So we have a lot of forcing coupled with our shear vector orientation, which we'll show you here. So our pertinent boundaries are right there, and you can see a fairly decent component that is parallel to that initiating boundary, which is the dry line, Pacific front, cold front, whatever you want to call it. So this combined with the strong forcing, that should lead to a pretty quick transition to a more messy storm mode, a more linearly organized storm mode. We probably will have some semi-discrete supercells within this line, within this area, but it does look like we're going to see a pretty quick transition to more of a linearly organized system with some segments in there, some line segments, and some semi-discrete embedded supercells in there. But we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. Going forward with time there, 21Z to 0Z, we see that continues. So I think the storm mode is going to be the big issue for today. Going to be a lot of storms, a lot of forcing, and those shear vectors oriented parallel to the initiating boundary, going to mean those storms are going to interact with each other pretty significantly to foster a little bit more messy storm mode. But any more embedded supercells and any more semi-discrete supercells, also if any storms can form out ahead of the main initiating boundary in the main line, that could lead to a more semi-discrete threat out there, and that could be able to tap into this environment pretty significantly going into the afternoon. Just to show you, at 850 millibars, this low-level jet going to translate very rapidly off to the northeast today. This is a very strong plume of low-level jet there centered across Iowa into southern Minnesota and Wisconsin. So we have 50 to 60, 70 plus knots of flow there in this core of the low-level jet, leading to very strong low-level shear and therefore an environment favorable for significant tornadoes. Again, the storm mode probably going to diminish that threat just a little bit, but any embedded supercells or even some spin-ups within the line could be on the strong side. And we'll take a look at some soundings here in a second, but assuming that this low-level jet does come to fruition, we should have some pretty strong low-level shear to play with for that strong tornado and a significant damaging wind threat. So let's go down and do that. Let's take a look at some soundings here. We'll go back to 18Z. We'll take a sounding here just out ahead of this dry line, frontal boundary, whatever you want to call it. And we'll take a look there, west central Iowa by 18Z. And our environment is pretty much already favorable for significant severe weather at this point. A little bit of capping inversion remaining here on the NAM. That may be just a NAM quirk here, but with such strong forcing, I think that cap that we saw in the morning sounding is going to erode pretty quickly, and so that shouldn't be too much of an issue. So overall, pretty deep moisture, robust instability, upwards of 2,800, 2,900 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE. So plenty of instability, very steep lapse rates aloft, leading to robust updrafts, and very strong low-level shear. You can see some varying strengthening of the winds with height there in the lowest few kilometers, leading to some significant hodograph curvature there, upwards of 300 meters square per second squared effective storm relative helicity, with some perhaps some venting of the winds, the precipitation out ahead, some backing there in the mid-levels. Could lead to some better visibility with these storms for any tornadic areas within these storms. But the main point is that this environment is kinematically and thermodynamically favorable for significant severe weather. Let's take a look farther south down the dry line here, down into southeast Kansas by 18Z. We might see a little bit of delayed initiation down here across this area because of the forcing is just a little bit less. But we'll take one here at 18Z. Environment not quite as favorable for significant severe weather. Some more capping down here with southern extent, not eroding as fast given less forcing. And our low-level winds are a little bit wonky there, not quite as much hodograph curvature, but still strong deep layer shear favorable for supercells. Let's move on to 21Z here. Storm should be well underway by this point. A couple regimes, some storms up here along right ahead of the surface low and warm front. Again, I still think we'll have a lot of storms up here, so the storm mode probably won't change all that much up here along the warm front. Could see some messy, a little bit more messy mode up there as well. Any storms that do fire out ahead of the main line will have that threat for all hazards and perhaps significant long track tornadoes, given a more discrete mode. But generally, most of your convection going to be along this frontal zone / dry line. So let's take a sounding here along the warm front up there in southern Minnesota. We'll take one down here just ahead of the actual dry line there, kind of central Iowa vicinity. Then we'll take one down here once again along the dry line there, Missouri-Kansas border, just north of Joplin. So up here along the warm front, a little bit of convective contamination, so keep that in mind as we analyze the sounding, but still a fairly favorable sounding for significant severe weather. Very strong instability, very strong low-level shear, 400 plus meters squared per second squared effective storm relative felicity, super intense curvature there of the hodograph, strong veering and strengthening winds with height there in the lowest kilometer or two, so that should favor very intense tornadic circulations with any embedded stuff there along the warm front, and any discrete supercells out ahead would foster that significant tornado threat. Down here in central Iowa, very strong instability developing by this point, strong low-level instability, very fat cape there in the lowest couple kilometers of the atmosphere, 0 to 3 kilometer cape, 235. So that is pretty intense low-level instability, helping to aid in tilting and stretching any spin at the surface into the vertical to aid in tornadogenesis with any of these more robust updrafts. Strong low-level shear remains here across north central to central Iowa by this point. Strong veering and strengthening of the winds with height. All in all, a very favorable thermodynamic and kinematic environment for significant tornadoes. Significant damaging winds as well. This stronger flow aloft will be able to get transported downward through downdrafts to the surface, so we could see some 60, 70, 80, 90 plus mile an hour winds with these storms, especially as the storms kind of congeal into more of a line as we go into the afternoon hours today. Down to the south, again, we maintain that kind of wonky wind profile there. Not a ton of curvature there in the low levels of the hodograph, but we do have strong instability to support a large hail and damaging wind threat for the most part, with storms down here along the dry line into southeast Kansas, southwest Missouri, northeast Oklahoma. Going on to 0Z here, again, you see the very progressive nature of these features, the frontal zone or dry line all the way here in eastern Iowa by this point. So very progressive nature to the system, very strong kinematics with this system. We'll just take a quick sounding here as we move into southwest Wisconsin, kind of by the Iowa-Wisconsin border here. This is going to be at 7 p.m. Central Daylight Time, and we maintain that very significant environment going into the early evening hours tonight. Strong instability, strong low-level shear, favorable for all severe hazards, mostly that significant damaging wind and significant tornado threat. So let's take a look at some model data, some convection allowing model data. We don't have our newest convection allowing models in yet, so what we do have the HRRR, so we'll take a look at the HRRR here and see how it handles this morning convection. Let me check if the 12Z run is out far enough. Not quite out far enough, so we'll use the 11Z run here. So you can see how it's initialized the morning convection here across western Iowa. Not quite far enough south here. We did see some of those storms down into far northwest Missouri. We'll check the radar here real quick, and you see the extension of those storms down here into northwest Missouri. So a little bit off here with the depiction of this ongoing convection, but overall decent depiction of this convection. You can see it moves off very quickly here, and behind it we get quick initiation of storms just ahead of the surface low. Right here, the HRRR, interestingly, has the surface low much farther south than the NAM. Let's take a look here at how it has depicted the surface low. So you see here by 18Z, the NAM had it up here in far southwest Minnesota. The HRRR has it down here, kind of on the Nebraska-Iowa border down there, a few counties to the south. There's your warm frontal zone right in there. So that is interesting there that the HRRR depicts it a little bit farther south, and I do tend to believe that a little bit more, given the impacts of morning convection outflow reinforced warm front there may not be able to move that far north as the NAM suggests. So I suspect the HRRR is a little bit better here with the positioning of the surface low, given how it's handled the morning convection. So I suspect this is going to be a little bit better of a solution than what the NAM was showing. But all in all, right there's the surface low, and right there, this is at 18Z, so 1 p.m. Central Daylight Time, and we get all of those storms to fire right ahead of the surface low there into northwest and western Iowa there by 1 to 2 p.m., perhaps a little earlier. Then you can see we do have some semi-discrete supercells in here for sure, but we do get a pretty quick transition, a lot of convection along this eastward moving boundary, the dryline front, whatever you want to call it. Quickly moves off to the east, and we do have some embedded supercells in there, but a very much linearly organized complex moving off to the east. And then as we go into the later afternoon hours, 2, 3, 4 p.m., we get initiation down here to the south, western Missouri, southeast Kansas, northeast Oklahoma. A few supercells there within the line with that mostly large hail and damaging wind threat, outside chance for a tornado or two, and then we'll see that continue off to the east as we go into the evening hours tonight. I just want to take a look quickly at the northern sector here, a little bit farther to the north across Minnesota and Wisconsin, as that is a viable area for a significant severe threat today. You can see a lot of convection there to the north and along that warm front. But any supercells, we'll have to watch out in here. Any supercells that can fire out ahead of this main line, out across southern Minnesota, northeast Iowa, southwest Wisconsin, will have a better chance for producing significant long track tornadoes, given a little bit more discrete mode than areas in the line, which may be difficult to maintain long track tornadoes, although those tornadoes could be significant. Let's take a look quickly at what the last night's cams were showing here. This is the 0Z ARW, so I don't really like doing this, going back and looking at cams, because as you can see here, the depiction of the morning convection pretty far off from reality here. Here's what we have going right now. That line stretching from southwest Iowa into northwest Missouri, some convection out ahead of that. That is not really what this was showing, kind of an east-west oriented complex of storms there across the northern half of Iowa. So a little bit off here with the depiction of the morning convection by the 0Z ARW, but the idea looks to be the same here. We get pretty quick, pretty robust initiation along the dry line there across western Iowa by early afternoon. Some stuff out here along the warm front there, southern Minnesota into western Wisconsin could pack a punch, but you can see a pretty quick transition to a squall line there across parts, a very intense squall line, let me say. Very nice looking squall line there with some significant damaging winds along it, some kinks there in the squall line. So embedded tornadoes, significant damaging winds, the greatest threats as we get a full squall line to develop if this solution comes to fruition going into the late afternoon and early evening hours today. Last night's NSSL WRF model. Let's take a look at that, and you see much of the same, a little bit different there of a depiction. That's way too far east given what we have seen here with our morning data, so taking this one with a grain of salt, but the idea is the same. A lot of convection there, pretty quick transition to a linearly organized complex. All right, that's going to do it for this video for this morning. Again, a very potent, widespread severe weather outbreak is on tap, particularly in the moderate and enhanced risk regions there across parts of the Midwest into the Mid-South. Moderate risk area level 4 out of 5 exists there in the red shaded region, parts of Iowa, southwest Wisconsin, western to northwest Illinois, northern Missouri. That includes places like Des Moines, Osceola, Cedar Rapids, Waterloo, Iowa, up to La Crosse, Wisconsin, or toward Peoria, Illinois, Hannibal, Missouri, Bethany, Missouri. You are all under the gun for that level 4 out of 5 risk. Level 3 out of 5 enhanced risk also features a very significant severe weather threat there. Milwaukee, Green Bay, Chicago, Springfield, Illinois, Jefferson City, Kansas City, Springfield, Missouri, Joplin, Missouri, all in that level 3 out of 5 enhanced risk. And then a large slight risk there from the upper peninsula of Michigan down into the southern plains and southwest Texas there. So broad severe weather risk area, but the greatest threat again going to be in the orange and especially red shaded regions here today. All hazards going to be significant here when they do happen today. Significant tornadoes on the table there, especially within the yellow and red stippled regions there. 15% hatched area within that moderate risk. Iowa, southwest Wisconsin, northwest Illinois, northern Missouri, with a 10 hatched area surrounding that. So significant long track tornadoes are possible with these storms today. Again, I think storm mode is going to keep the overall significant tornado outbreak threat at a little bit at bay, although any spin-ups, even within any potential squall line that develops, will have the chance of being strong. So that is going to be a major threat for today, as is the damaging wind threat. 45% hatched area for damaging wind, so significant 70, 80, 90 plus mile an hour winds possible, especially within the pink area there of the eastern Iowa, western to northwest Illinois, down into northeast Missouri, including Des Moines, Peoria, Hannibal. Could see some significant, very strong damaging straight line winds there. Significant large hail is a threat for today over a broad area, all the way down from southwest Texas northward, with the greatest threat there in the red and pink stippled regions there. 45% hashed area for significant severe hail, 2 to 3+ inches in diameter hailstones there possible from especially north central to southwest Iowa into northwest Missouri, including the Des Moines area. So significant hail, especially in the initial portion of the convective life cycle, is a possibility before things transition into more of a tornado and damaging wind threat, given strong low-level shear. So all in all, a very, very potent, widespread severe weather event on tap for today, and we could see multiple rounds of strong storms moving through these areas with the potential for all severe hazards, all of which could be significant. So if you live in these areas, particularly the orange and especially the red shaded regions today, keep those weather radios handy, keep your sources of weather information handy, your local news, your local NWS office, SPC, keep those sources of information handy today, as it is going to be a long day, a potent day. But if you have a plan and have those sources at hand, and have a plan for when severe weather is approaching your area, you'll get through this event just fine. So with that, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.